Hi, welcome. Bruchim habaim, which translates as welcome in Hebrew. I'm just so happy to be here today. Julie, thank you for inviting me in, and what a wonderful collaboration, the Summer Institute on Theology and Disability and the Faith Inclusion Network of Dallas coming together. I think that one of the most important observations of my work over the last 13 years in Jewish community inclusion and in Jewish life has been the way that we all work together, the way that the challenges that we face in order to ensure that people with disabilities feel that they belong, and I use the word belong, you'll hear me use that a lot, feel that they belong in the community and in their faith community is a critical point now. It's at a critical point. We're hearing a lot about it. It has moved from a little tiny, this congregation here has a special needs class, and this JCC, or Jewish Community Center, has a program for people with disabilities, and they come together once a month and they do projects. We've gone from that era to an era where we recognize that each person is created b'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image, that each person has their own sense of who they are as a spiritual being, as a believer in whatever power they believe. We have that in common. And now we're at a point in our lives, in our inclusion lives, where it's going to be really important for people who have disabilities and those who love them to contribute and be part of the community. This is based on theology, but it's also based on the human heart. It's based on how we treat each other. And the most important part, it's based on recognizing that each person has their own history. They have their own feelings, their own needs. And it's not up to any of us, meaning the global us, to determine what they want, the they, which still puts them in the category of the other, but what people want in terms of being members of a congregation or a faith community. So I'm going to ask those of you who are sitting by yourselves or in groups of two to, for the sake of what we're doing next, or what we're doing first, to join another table. And I'm just going to say, if I don't, I know this is all really nicely taped down, but I will find a way to trip. Just kidding. You have to too. Okay. So it's hard to sit. It's hard to sit with people and not converse, and especially a topic that can be so personal. So we're going to take the personal, and we're going to do something. We're going to do a little work together. On each table is a sheet of labels. Looks like this. It looks like this. Okay. Somebody can pick it up and hold it. Well, we're going to do one per table. So if you don't have one at your table, okay. And you each have a piece of plain paper with some lines on it, okay? This is where this little project is going to appear. It's going to become something on this piece of paper. So on each set of labels has 14, yes, math wasn't my strong suit. It turns out I have a learning disability in math. Long, I used to think I was really stupid because I couldn't do math. Yeah, we're all like going, oh yeah, I used to be, yeah. Yeah, it is, because we don't do math. But I can do math in my head. It's the weirdest thing. Anyway, each one of these it comes from the liturgy, or it comes from text. And each one of these separately may have a meaning in terms of what it says about including people with disabilities, helping them belong. Come sit at a table where somebody else is. Or as they say, come on down. So I'm going to give pretty vague instructions here. And there's always a reason for vague instructions. Some of us could get pages and pages of instructions and they still seem vague. But this is really your opportunity to have a discussion at your table and open this up to the discussion of how you would take these 14 gems and put them into categories in terms of how they reflect the attitudes, beliefs, the actions of an inclusive congregation or an inclusive community. What do they signify to you as discussion? And you can then take these labels, put them on your paper. Oh, sorry, Julie. On your paper. And then we're going to go around, and each table is going to just kind of give us a tiny bit of feedback about how you came to those conclusions. So don't worry, there's no right answers, there's no wrong answers, there's no perfect way of doing this. So I'll give you an example of some of these may represent to your group a community obligation. Could, might not. I've done this a million times, and every time it's different. Every group is different. So please go ahead. We're going to give you 10 minutes. Hi. Let's go till 1:30 on the study, and then we'll recap for a few minutes after that. Okay, let's start wrapping up. Who's done? I mean, theoretically done. Yeah, I know. Done is a relative thing, isn't it? Done enough. Are y'all done enough? Okay. Done enough. I like that. Okay. So, how was this? How were the instructions?
You were very vague.
I was very vague. I was vague on purpose. Thank you. Sometimes I think, we've got these great creative minds. Let's be creative. And oftentimes, actually, when we support people with disabilities, a lot of times we just say, we're not going to be very vague. We're going to be really specific, and we're going to do this for you. We're going to tell you what you're going to do, whether you like it or not. And so let's hold that thought in our minds. And how was it having this discussion? Were there any? I didn't see any duking it out. Did you guys have disagreements? Disappointments. Oh. And I hope you're not disappointed. No, I'm not at all. No. Pretty civil conversations. For the most part, people representing different faith traditions at the table, and so.
Different life experiences, so the way you read something, and if you live personally in a world of disability, if you're professional, you may think you read it.
Exactly. Can you all hear? I want to make sure everybody can hear other people speaking. So let's just at your table, from your table, let's hear from each table. Just let's hear the groups that you came up with. I'm just kind of curious about the groups you came up with. Who'd like to start? And don't all volunteer at once, because I can't. Okay. Do you want the microphone?
Do I need one?
Yeah, let's do that just to make sure that everybody can hear. Thank you.
Okay, so we kind of quickly divided ours into 3 categories that are not really exclusive. One is the all means all, or diversity and community category. One is obligations and moral imperatives. And the other one is about teaching and learning, although those kind of run into each other throughout the...
Okay, so what did you have under the first category was all means all?
Yep.
What are some of the ones you had under there?
So we have the, O God, may all created in your image recognize that they are kin, so that in one spirit and in one friendship they may be forever united before you. All your children shall be students of Adonai, and God created people in God's image, and blessed are you, eternal God, who makes your creations differently.
Okay, thank you. All means all. I like it. That's a new one. Who'd like to go next? Oh, there's Judith. There you go.
So the Jewish table, we didn't understand the instructions, so we were a little Talmudic about it all.
All right, that's good.
Do you want me to read what we wrote? I was the scribe. So we wrote down the different quotes and wrote down what they meant to us in terms of how you'd put them into practice.
Okay, so let's hear a couple of them.
Okay. For my house shall be a house of prayer for all people. Everybody belongs. It doesn't matter how you pray. You accommodate when you can. One challenge is to accommodate the individual while meeting the needs of the group. Everyone can pray in their own way. Which other one do you want me to do? Okay. Okay. There was one that we really had a good talk about. Oh, do not separate yourself from the community. We wrote, we are all in this together. Not all people are comfortable together. We still must invite them in. Do not add to someone's isolation, and do not isolate yourself. And then we had, be like the disciples of Aaron, love peace and pursue peace, love people and bring them close to Torah. Take the initiative to create peace. It starts with each of us. Engage with another to find out how or whether he or she wants to be included. And then, Holy One strikes us all from the mold of the first human, and each one of us is unique. We are all exactly alike, and we are all completely different. And we could go on and on, because here we are on our little table.
How would this be a discussion at your board during Jewish Disability Awareness Month, as an example? To really get those board members off their whatever and onto studying text and what it means in the context of congregation land. So, possible. Who's next? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. There you go, Esther. Thank you.
All right. Our 3 categories were relationship with God, responsibility, and how people are created. And the one that we chose that we felt covered all of those 3 categories was the second one, O God, may all create in your kin image recognize that they are kin, so that in one spirit and in one friendship they may be forever united before you. So we like that one a lot. And another one that we felt encompassed all those three was the Holy One strikes all of us from the mold of the first human, and each one of us is unique.
Very nice. Okay, thank you. Okay, it leaves us with 3 groups. There you are.
I think our group has understood that we have to go according to some categories. That's what you requested. So we thought of different categories because these verses are talking straight to the person straight, one category. The other category is related to interpersonal. The third one is community oriented. So whenever we read one, it sometimes combine 2, 3 also. So we try to categorize as interpersonal, personal, and then community.
Very
So that
nice.
way we stick the papers like that.
Yeah, that
So-
works. Interpersonal, God, and
Community.
community.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, and give us an example of interpersonal that you chose.
Yeah. If there be among you a needy person, you shall not harden your heart, but shall surely open your hand. It's interpersonal
Yeah.
and person to person, and it's very clear that how a person should interact with the other person.
Very nice. And what about with God?
The instructions are teaching straight from God. Do what is good and right in the sight of God. Straight,
Direct,
right.
no
No
messing around. How about community?
Yeah, for community, for my house shall be the house of prayer for all people, inclusiveness, inclusive community.
Yes. And I like that one, that what that says, I guess, is it doesn't define what prayer looks like. It doesn't tell you people have to pray in a certain way. And yet, there's that communication that we have, that each of us has with, it can be with God, it can be with really any kind of Holy Spirit relationship. You guys haven't done yours yet? Okay.
I think, anytime you try to categorize something, you're going to have a lot of discussion. So I think we
Yes.
actively looked at that, and we started with words, and then we tried to go from words to themes, and I think that's what we're hearing right now is, so I'm listening to, I didn't hear 3. I don't think any of us got down to 3, but I think it was kind of around that area, and we started with the theme of inclusive, but then is it inclusive or belonging, and the difference between inclusive and belonging. Would you share that?
Well, she taught it to me.
Yeah, I think that's very special.
But in your own words.
Yeah, not in mine, but your words, and they were somebody else's. That was so powerful yesterday. You said inclusive is when if you show up at the door, we will welcome you, and belonging is if you're not here, we'll come find you.
And so,
Really different. And I'm going to take that back to my church because we're very inclusive, but not very belonging.
and I think with that, to take those together, then serving to meet the needs of all those with an open heart. So that was kind of the overall theme, and we looked at that. For my house shall be the house of prayer for all people in terms of that. Do not separate yourself. Do not insult. O God, may all created in your image. So those were the scriptures that we were taking to kind of categorize in that area. Then we went on to empowering and education. And so that came with the strong words of teach.
Yes.
And then all children shall be students, so kind of categorizing around that. And every member of the people of Israel is obligated to study. So those were common words that go with that theme. We had affirmation as one, and we talked about acceptance is different than affirmation,
Yes.
and so we agreed on the word of affirmation. And God created people in God's image, so it's affirming God, but also affirming all people. And what does the Lord require but for you to do justice and love and kindness? And then we didn't kind of get there. We had two left, and I kind of put that together under faith.
Okay.
In terms of blessed and do what is good and right. And then the last was in action, so it's faith in action, is said, be like the disciples of Aaron, love, peace, and that's where we are.
Terrific. Thank you. And it's your turn. You can come up and join tables up here. We've got handouts and stuff.
We were
too.
done way before anybody else. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
We created a visual, really, and it's similar to what everyone has said. We kind of categorize these into two broad areas. One is, what are we commanded or obligated to do, and then how do we operationalize those things? How do we actually do those things? So at the top we have, for my house shall be a house for a prayer for all people. And then we put the teach and the do. We kind of looked at this as being the how, and we looked at these as being the commandments, or it was reversed. They interweave back and forth. But we decided that they all sort of, that the capstone or the ending thought is that, that we're all unique, that we're all the same, but we're all unique. And then blessed are you, eternal God, who makes your creations differently. So,
Wow.
That was it. We just sort of decided to do the whole visual thing.
And it was actually a little bit hard to separate the two because they all overlap so much. So they're woven together.
So one of the things you might come out of, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Imagine that. They do. They can. They do. It's your call as a group. Well, congratulations, Mazal Tov, Yasher Koach, Kol HaKavod. That means all the respect for a great study session. So this is something that we can study. And we'll go over a little bit of that today in terms of how to put this together. But sometimes people often ask, well, they ask me two questions. The first one is, how did you come to this work? And the second question is, are you really Jewish with your last name of Christensen? And the answer to that question is yes, I am. We like to say it's the Jewish spelling. One of the things that didn't come out in our text, and that's perfectly fine, is the idea of from generation to generation, Lador Vador. And that's how I got started as a parent, because I'm just pointing out the whole family tree here, but my dad and my mom, you can see my brother and I up at the top, we were raised in a home that of which education was a requirement, a right, an obligation, a privilege, and that included for me 10 years of Hebrew school. So I was indoctrinated quite nicely there. But it served me well. After my last year of Hebrew school, I checked out of the Jewish world for a long time, but I checked out of the organized Jewish world. I kind of had enough of it. But during my lifetime, I've developed an absolute love of the scripture, love of Torah, and I actually teach students for their bar and bat mitzvahs now. Somehow I always get the kids with disabilities. They're my favorite people. Anyway, so my husband, Rick Christensen, and I got married. We were married in a Reformed congregation. He grew up as a Baptist, and after we were married 18 years, significant, he converted to Judaism. I had nothing to say about it. I kept my mouth zipped. But I called my parents as soon as Rick told me he was going to convert. I said, Mom, Dad, you're getting a Jewish son-in-law. So happy. Well, during that time, we raised 3 children. These are the guys here at the Oktoberfest, just saying. Aaron is the middle one, and he's the oldest. He's the one that, in the middle picture, married Nancy, and together they have Eli. And there's Eli at his bris in February. And he's so adorable, let me just tell you. Anyway, and of course, Eli is what my daughter-in-law calls a Jew-Asian. She is Vietnamese. He is Jewish, and will be raised in our tradition. So this is from generation to generation. Now, there's something happened here that might have disrupted our system somewhat. The child on the right, or on the left, on your left is Jacob, and the child on the right is Zach, who likes green hats, apparently. But Jacob was diagnosed when he was 7 years old with ADHD. And the only reason he was diagnosed is because he was a problem in school. And so we had to find out what was wrong with him. This is straight from the horse's mouth. Find out what's wrong with him. So immediately when we were told he had ADHD, I went, what did I do? How did I cause it? What is ADHD? I don't know, but it must be bad because this is why we're here at this therapist's office, at the doctor's office. I don't know if you know this, but ADHD is the most heritable of all of the brain wiring sort of things. So Jacob would come by that, honestly, I must say, from his ancestors. Let's just put it that way. Turned out Jacob didn't have ADHD alone. When he was 15, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a brand new diagnosis at the time. And frankly, we were so excited because we had how Jacob operated in the world had a name. It had a set of criteria, and the truth is Jacob didn't meet all of them, but he met enough of them to at least qualify for special education services in school. Jacob's school life had been horrendous since kindergarten, and actually when he was in preschool, our little Jewish preschool, he was the student of the week. He was 4 years old. And we went to school on Friday for Shabbat morning, where they have the challah and the grape juice. And the kids say the blessings, and yeah. And the teacher had put up a big sheet of paper that described Jacob, and we had sent pictures along with it. So there's pictures of the family and everything. So it said Jacob's favorite color, green. Jacob's favorite TV show, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if you remember that, then we're probably the same age. Favorite food, pizza. Favorite book, Gone with the Wind. Now, I knew my 4-year-old had never read Gone with the Wind, had never seen the movie. And I went, this kid's a little quirky guy. I thought it was really cute. Jacob was just Jacob. Later on, it turns out that particular comment was, a little sign that he might have had Asperger's syndrome, had we known what Asperger's syndrome was. Anyway, so that was our dream, Jacob, to grow up in the community, in the Jewish community, receive a Jewish education, just like his brothers, just like anybody else. And he did. And it was wonderful. When I tell you it was wonderful, except for the time that he got into a fight in the parking lot with another kid who also probably had Asperger's syndrome, he had a really great religious school experience. And he learned Hebrew, he had his bar mitzvah. He learned things by rote. And that was kind of interesting. It's like, you're not learning this the way other kids learn it, Jacob. You got to learn to be able to read it from the Torah. Well, eventually he did. But he learned it at first by rote. He went on the confirmation class trip when he was 16. And we're members of a Reform congregation, Reform Jewish congregation. And they go to the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C. when they're 16 as part of confirmation. And they meet with representatives from our local or our state officials. And Jacob was chosen by his classmates to present, I can't remember the topic now. It was either rights for people who are GLBT or another controversial issue that I'm not sure what it was. But anyway, so he had a pretty you know, we never had problems in religious school, but other people did. Other kids did. And our problems started in public school, and by the time Jacob got to 9th grade, I was so angry all the time at Jacob being singled out, and teachers saying, well, Jacob can't do this and Jacob can't do that, and crying after every conference, and just, I had to be angry somewhere, so I chose to be angry at the school people. By the way, I was also pretty darn angry at God, so we've had some serious, well, I've had serious words with God, and God just goes, yeah, I know it's hard. I figure God kind of understands that it's hard, and, you know, go forth. Do what you need to do. And we were lucky we had a faith community to back us up, to have our backs. I went to graduate school at the age of 48. I won't say how many years or when I graduated. But the idea for me was to learn what drove parents to be so angry. I really wanted to understand that process because I realized that I wasn't helping Jacob at all, and neither was anybody. Neither were other parents helping their kids if they were going to be angry all the time. So that's a whole different story. While I was in graduate school, I was hired by the Minneapolis Jewish community for a brand new program called the Minneapolis Jewish Community Inclusion Program for people with disabilities. It was a program that was developed to not only create the conversation, but to work collaboratively with all of the Jewish institutions in Minneapolis, as well as people who have disabilities and family members, to change the culture, to really adapt the culture. Now, I didn't light a match and put a candle to it and go, here we are, we're enlightened. This was a lot of work, and I'm going to tell you, we are going to talk about this because I want you to understand that none of this happens in a vacuum. It takes steps, okay? So we'll get to that. I'm going to share with you some of those steps. We say even Moses needed a voice. So again, like what we just studied, our text, there's something in everywhere you look. But I love the Moses story because Moses is just so reluctant. Now, why do you think God said to Moses, essentially, you're the man? Moses is going, I can't be the man because I don't speak clearly. Why? Because he
calls the common man all the time.
Okay, so he's kind of like everybody else in some ways. Okay, what else? Thank you.
Perhaps since he recognized he could not do it on his own, he would be open to God's power.
Okay. Okay, so kind of that theory of mind, understanding self-sufficiency. What else? Judith.
Maybe God wanted us to know that you didn't have to be perfect to actualize some kind of higher calling. And even if you were the spokesperson for a whole group of people, it didn't mean you had to really talk like everybody else.
Okay, so any other?
Maybe some interdependence, beginning to grow in his understanding when God said God would provide Aaron to do whatever it was that Moses felt he couldn't do himself, but together they'd get it done.
The first known accommodation, reasonable accommodation, was Aaron. Right. God saw, yes. Yes.
Maybe God knew that he would create more change and more of a domino effect if more of the community was involved in helping Moses.
Okay. So as part of building community. Okay. So I love all these ideas. I love them all. I think there's, it's, my grandfather used to say, to be known, you have to be shown. In other words, people have to know you're out there, that you exist. He was a wise guy. I'm a wise man, too. Moses had the characteristics Whatever those were, Moses had the characteristics. God saw those characteristics. He is the guy, even if Moses didn't think he was. And sometimes I think that helps us think as well. There's where is it? In Numbers, Beha'alotecha is the Torah portion. How does that translate? Beha'alotecha. Ba'alot, go up. I can't remember. Fake Rabbi Christensen. Letting up. Okay, letting up. Okay. So in this particular portion, Miriam and Aaron speak against Moses' wife. Okay? And Miriam is punished. I'm just giving you the cliff notes here. Miriam's punished. She's sent outside the camp because she's got leprosy. She gets leprosy. Leprosy is the punishment. She's let outside the camp because that's what you do when somebody has leprosy. The community could have moved on because they were in the wilderness. And they were on a mission. I like to say they're on a mission from God. But the community waited for Miriam because they were not whole until everyone was there. Okay? We can look at other texts, too, that would sort of balance that out, but we're not going to do that today. Finally, in Deuteronomy, the very beginning of one of Parsha Nitzavim, we are gathered here this day, all of us, the leaders, the wood choppers, everybody everybody who had a role in this community, in this society. We're all gathered here, men, women, children, people who lived the strangers who lived in the camp, and they were all there to conclude the covenant with God, even those who were not there that day. So it just kind of puts that value of inclusion, in other words, belonging, to everybody. So we're going to move off of text here, I think. Okay. Have you ever been out of alignment? Anybody been to a chiropractor? When you're out of alignment, what happens? Everything's affected. You're in pain. Are you working the best way you could? Generally speaking, not working the best way that you could. So when we started the Minneapolis Jewish Community Inclusion Program, we were completely out of alignment with Jewish values. As I said before, in fact, when I started working in 2001, in September of 2001, I kind of hit the ground running. My job, I reached out to every level of the Jewish community, and I started with the rabbis in our community. And I called the synagogues, told them who I was. Some of them knew me. Some I had to say, Shalom, my name is Shelly Christensen. I had to I don't know, maybe if I'd said it in Hebrew, they would have thought I was Jewish, because I had to overcome that barrier too. Kind of funny. But I called one congregation, and I told them that I was starting this work to be able to work with them, to help them support people with disabilities. And he said, oh, we don't have any people with disabilities here. That would be out of alignment. That's out of alignment to Jewish values. It's out of alignment to reality. And the truth of the matter is, there could have been one or two options. Number one, they didn't see that people had disabilities because everybody was welcome, and disability wasn't a barrier, and everything was, ticking along. Or that there were no people with disabilities because families felt marginalized or didn't feel that they belonged, or that people, maybe didn't have a way to get in the building, or if they got in the building, they were, you can sit here and nobody will talk to you, but because we're kind of afraid of you, as we've talked about earlier in our work this week. So the keys to an aligned organization, we align our values with how we act, are these items here. There shouldn't be any surprises except for we don't do things for people with disabilities. We do things with people with disabilities. When we started the inclusion program in Minneapolis, we had an advisory committee. And I came in about 9 months into the process, and I met with the advisory committee, and I looked and I went, wow, you're a parent, you're a parent, you're a parent, you're an educator, you're an educator, you're an educator, you're an executive director, you work for Jewish Family and Children's Service, you work for Federation, and I went, where are the people for whom this program was established, or with whom this program was established? There were no people with disabilities even on the planning committee. So you can tell there was a lot of work to do, and I want to tell you these things because you got to know this was like a community that was functioning at a pretty low level at the time. No one does this alone. Nothing about me without me. That kind of comes into all of that. The whole idea of balancing what's important to someone who has a disability, not necessarily what's important for them. Oftentimes when we think what's important for someone, that's our call. What's important to someone means you got to have the relationship. So let's do this little exercise. You can, if you're comfortable closing your eyes, but please don't fall asleep. I know. You could do this standing up or looking at the wall or whatever too, or shaking your hands. Think about this. What is it that you appreciate, you enjoy, or that tells you that you belong to your house of worship? Think about that. Got it? Everybody got it? Okay, imagine that either it never existed or somebody came to you and said, you can't do that anymore. You're not going to do that anymore. What would your life be like? Not to share. How would you feel if somebody told you you didn't get to have any say in what you did? That is what the balance is between what's important to someone and what's important for someone. By the way, that's called person-centered thinking. It is a phenomenally useful set of tools. An aligned organization makes the commitment to inclusion at every level of the congregation, and that's why we talk about it being woven in to every part of the community, every part of the congregation, every part of the organization. So there was a Hasidic master, Hasidim, well, still around today, but started in the 19th century in Eastern Europe. And there was a master. His name was Ha-Yehudi Ha-Kadosh, the Holy Jew. His name was Jacob of some place in Eastern Europe. I can't remember the location. Anybody know? Bushamanim or something? I don't know. Anyway, he wrote this comment in response to something else. But look at this. This is what we do. We have good intentions. We have good intentions because we're good people. We're people who say, we got these great values that we ascribe to. We believe in them. They help us define how we live our lives. They're intentions. But without action, we got nothing except good intentions. And when you translate good intentions without action, what do you have? Good intentions. So the main thing is the action. And that really is that is really the important piece. So, whoops. What I'm going to do, you're probably wondering, well, how do you change a community? You do it one step at a time. You do it in a way that's meaningful. So what I did is I located the very first presentation that I ever gave to every single Jewish institution in our community. I've shared it with other communities as well. It is the beginning step of why we do inclusion and what this community partnership can do. I strongly recommend community partnerships, whether it's within a denomination or a geographic area or like in Dallas. Interfaith, doesn't matter. And I can speak for the Jewish movements. They're all putting together a variety of different ways to be inclusive. So our program started in 2001. This is our bar or bat mitzvah year. I just left the program 2 weeks ago. And it was started basically because parents came to Jewish Family and Children's Service, which housed the program, and said, our kids are, they're included in public school, but they're not included in religious school. We want them to have bar and bat mitzvahs. It's all the experiences that my family had that a lot of families didn't have. And the community listened, and they not only listened to parents, but they listened to clergy and people who are providing services in the community who were frustrated because they wanted to make sure everybody was included but didn't have the resources, didn't have the knowledge, they weren't aware. So it was really clearly time to jump on the bus and get something started. They did a lot of studies. They actually did this study. I have a copy if you want it. I don't have it with me, but I can always get it to you. I'll just show you what that said as part of the presentation. So my job the first year was to meet with all the professionals, to meet with all the boards, to meet with lay leaders, and to convene a committee of lay leaders so that we could weave inclusion throughout the entire community and the entire congregation, and so that the lay leaders could support each other as much as they were supporting their organization. So now I'm going to take you into a very quick, one would hope. Here we go. So this is how the Minneapolis Jewish community portrayed these. I'm gonna pull this from my memory, so help me if I can remember parts of this. Amazing. Well, I'd like to introduce you to Avi. One look at those blue eyes, and you cannot help but melt. Isn't he gorgeous? And this is Amy. Amy just celebrated becoming a bat mitzvah. She would really like to go on to join a youth group and go to camp. This is Becca. Becca's graduated with her bachelor's degree. She really wants to work in Jewish communal services. And this is Sam, and Sam loves nothing more than to go to synagogue, sit in shul, and pray. Now, you've just seen these people as most of the Jewish community sees them. They're invisible, aren't they? You can't see them. The reason that we're here, the reason that we have the inclusion program is to help move from invisibility, there we go, to visibly in. The definition of inclusion that we're using for our program is that people with and without disabilities get to participate in all aspects of Jewish life. There are barriers to inclusion, and they prevent people who have disabilities from participating in activities that their peers may have. Our program is based on Jewish values. Ahavat olam, the love of fellow humans, rachamim, compassion, chesed, loving kindness and loyalty in how we treat each other, and b'tselem Elohim, recognition that we are all created in the divine image. Our community should serve all its members, not just those without disabilities, and they should have access to everything that people without disabilities have. So That's why we started the Minneapolis Community Inclusion Program for people with disabilities, is to support your congregation, to support your organization, to be partners, to help establish the roadmap to creating a culture where everybody feels that they belong. The vision of the program is to bring all the existing efforts together in the community, form a central coordinating office, determine community actions, and work toward the realization of inclusion. The mission is where all people feel that they belong. We did a research project, and this is how it was conducted. It was quite professional, I must say. For children, the greatest need was for inclusive Jewish education, both formal and informal. Oops. For teens and young adults, continued engagement in Jewish life and transportation. And for adults, affordable and well-run Jewish housing, participation in Jewish life, and having a spiritual life. And of course, transportation. The inclusion program provides a central resource. This is so cute, we just had to put this. It's time to count Avi in. It's time to count Amy in, and Becca, and it's time to count Sam in. And most of all, it's time to count yourself in. That was the presentation. Many times people would cry. They'd say, "That's my family. Where were you 20 years ago when my child was sitting outside the synagogue?" So there have been a lot of changes since then. The logo for the program, by the way, who knows what that is in the middle? It's a chai. It's not an elephant. Sometimes people say it's an elephant. It's two Hebrew letters, chet and yud. The word chai means life. And in the midst of all the diversity of the community, everyone gets to live a Jewish life. So let's go back to our, boy, I almost put you in Excel. That would have been darn scary because I don't know what would have come up. All right, and why we're from the beginning? I don't know, but I'm going to get us back on track here. Okay, we also built a committee of lay leaders, and they're still in existence today. Same committee, some of the same members, but these are people who became the chairs of inclusion committees in their congregations. Not all of our congregations have inclusion committees, and congregations don't have to have inclusion committees, but this is what is really important in a congregation. It is, people, I was at a conference one time. I'm not digressing, this is true. We said, it was a group of parents who were interested in this topic, and we said, why don't you have an inclusive, what are the barriers? And they said, well, we don't want to bother the clergy, they're too busy. You know what? Right? I mean, everybody's got a plate load of stuff, so why can't this be a collaboration between lay leadership and professional leadership? Can you imagine if your clergy was responsible for collecting dues or counting the money that comes in, or for writing the whole curriculum and designing the whole curriculum for an entire religious school? You have lay leaders, you have committees. You have dues committees, fundraising committees. So inclusion committees follow that same model. And the inclusion committees, many inclusion committees, or in some congregations that don't have committees, have a designated lay leader point person who graciously accepts that role. It doesn't mean they do everything alone. It means they may pull together an ad hoc committee for an event or programs, or they may, a lot of times members of inclusion committees go to other committee meetings so that they can weave inclusion through all of that. What the inclusion committees in Minneapolis do a lot of now, besides addressing their own needs, which have been, by the way, evaluated or assessed And then a new plan is envisioned, a new strategic plan is created, that they now have working plans. So there's a lot more to this. But the Inclusion Committee's job is to keep raising awareness, because without continually raising awareness, it goes away. When we stop raising awareness, congregations might say, oh yeah, we have a special needs person in our religious school, and that's great. But what about the young kids in preschool all the way up to adults, as we like to say, birth to earth or baby to Zadie? Inclusion is about everyone. So inclusion committees are really important. One of the things that we do in Minneapolis now, our liaison committee has started, they are the community determinants of what happens during Jewish Disability Awareness Month. I want to tell you a little story about Jewish Disability Awareness Month. How many of you are familiar with it? Okay. Do you know what month it is? It's February. Okay. So, yeah, it is. Good guess. Good one. See, sometimes it's the obvious and we don't see it. In 2008, there's an organization called the Jewish Special Education International Consortium. It's been meeting for 27 years. They are leaders of individual community boards of Jewish education, which for most part don't exist any longer. But they are kind of the go-to people on special ed. And I got to go because I was the go-to person on anything to do with somebody with a disability in the Jewish community in Minneapolis. So it was a very vital group, and people were in this group where they had once been focused totally on special education. We're now looking at community inclusion, birth to earth, woven into all the activities. And we met in 2008, and we said, you know, everybody's busy doing like events and conferences. Wouldn't it be better if we could all do things in 1 month, you know, and just leverage our resources and, you know, kind of make a big deal out of it that it's happening here and it's happening in Atlanta and it's happening in Dallas and it's happening in Minneapolis. So we said, let's do it. We voted to do it. And we said, when are we going to do Jewish Disability Awareness Month? Which, by the way, the acronym is JDAM. It's so branded now. It's memorable, and we've added from awareness to inclusion as a tagline because we're like, it's more to it. Anyway, with exception of 2 people, most of us were of the Jewish mother persuasion, and also of the education persuasion. So what happens in the fall? We get the high holidays, we get the kids coming back to religious school. There's so much prep time in the early part of the fall. And so it didn't really give people a chance to plan activities in November or December, and who wants anything in December, and people go on vacation. So we said, okay, what about in the spring? And somebody said, yeah, but it's Passover and, you know, and Purim, and there's all kinds of things going on to prepare for that. And we've got to cook all these big meals and everything. So we're like, okay, we're running out of ideas here. And somebody said, well, what about February? There's nothing really major Jewish holiday-wise in the preceding months. So people could have from November to February to plan. And that's why February is Jewish Disability Awareness Month. There's no symbolism at all. And we thought, you know, well, it'd be hard to get to events in the Midwest, but actually it's kind of hit everywhere. So Jewish Disability Awareness Month, designed to raise awareness that there are people with disabilities who want to belong to the community, and the idea isn't just to say, okay, in February, do something in February and you're off the hook the other 11 months. The idea is to do something in February that will propel inclusion into the rest of the year. So I just want to show you a few of the national initiatives. Now keep this in mind that you can do this Oh, here's our mission. It's in your notes, I think. We picked the initiatives. We have, a number of films that came out. It's really pretty nice as a house of worship or as a community to bring people together to see a film. How many of you have seen Praying with Leor? Yeah, it's worth seeing again. It's a doozy. Films like Wretches and Jabberers, where people communicate differently. These very intelligent men, communicate using assistive technology. Prior to being able to use assistive technology, people thought that they're not very bright, they got nothing to say. This really helps us think differently, and that was the whole idea of Jewish Disability Awareness Month. The Real Abilities Film Festival, which is now, and they had one in Houston, they've had them in Dallas, I think. No, but Austin. And this is not a Jewish community initiative, the Real Abilities. Anybody can do this. Dave, you could do it in Watertown, Wisconsin. You could. A group of films that portray how people live when they have a disability. We started JDAM Reads and JDAM Reads for Children. These are some of the books that we've used that really describe some of the ways people live. They're very eye-opening books, and I think that that's really the important thing. We have national book clubs. We do webinars with the authors. We do lots of different ways of reaching out. So these are the whole idea, again, raise awareness. In Minneapolis 2 years ago, how many of you saw, oh gosh, what movie was it where Mickey Rooney said, let's put on a show? So, yeah, it was, wasn't it? So our group of lay leaders said, let's put on a show. So we created a show called Our Stories, Our Abilities, and most of the people have a disability of some kind, although, and they have many gifts. Some a lot of them told their stories, some performed. The young man and the young woman down in the corner here, Chris he's brilliant at picking up music and just being able to play it. And at every performance, he plays Lecha Dodi as his first song. It's a prayer of welcoming the Sabbath. And he plays it on the piano. And that's how he starts every performance, regardless of whether it's for ARC or it's for any group in the community. Rebecca is a vocalist, jazz vocalist primarily. This is the first time the two of them ever performed together. So they had to work together to be able to do this. Just the wide range of people who spoke, who are just people in the community, folks who are there talking about life with a disability and living with barriers or sharing talents or gifts. So there's some pretty amazing people there. It was really labor intensive, and I don't know that we would repeat it, but it was just a really neat opportunity. Some of the things that are happening now in recognition that inclusion of people with disabilities has really risen to one of the top priorities in Jewish communal life. So national Jewish organizations, the Jewish Federations of North America, which are based in New York and have an office in Washington, D.C., they've created an inclusion initiative. They've done conferences. There's Association of Jewish Family and Children's Services, which Julie is a part of and Judith is a part of. Anybody else work for JFS here, or JFCS, in their local community? Okay. It's a national organization that, again, has hired somebody to work with their affiliates on a national level. Camps. All the Jewish camps now have inclusion specialists, or most of them, I should say, have inclusion specialists. They may have an inclusion program. And again, they run the gamut from a self-contained program to partially inclusive to fully inclusive. I'm not gonna talk about segregated programs and partially included programs because I want to go back to what does it really mean to live a full and meaningful life. So that is people's personal designations, people's personal understandings, and so forth. So I'm not gonna, it gets very political. And so we won't go there today. One of the initiatives that has come out of this came from the National Leadership Institute on Developmental Disabilities. Has anybody ever gone to this? It's in Delaware. It was co-founded by a Jewish guy named Steve Eidelman and his colleague Nancy Weiss, who you know very well. They started this consortium, or this a leadership institute. They hold 2 a year at the University of Delaware. And the idea of the institute is for people to come into it who are in leadership roles in their own communities, whether they may be people who are in government, who maybe work for a Department of Human Services or Disability Services in their state, or they may be in a faith community, or they may be running executive directors of ARCs, and you name it. I got to go to one of these back about 6 years ago, and it changed my thinking about life with a disability. It changed my thinking to reflect person-centeredness, focusing on what's important to the person, not for them, looking at housing and saying, and thinking, would anyone I know choose to live in a 4-bedroom house with strangers and with somebody telling them when to brush their teeth and what to eat? It made me really think. It made me really think about what having a disability is perceived to be and what people who have disabilities, how people see themselves. And it's been a great thought process for me. So Steve Eidelman and I were at a conference a year and a half ago, a Jewish conference, and there were 140 people there in Baltimore who were all there to learn about including people with disabilities, and it was amazing. We had some great speakers. We had this, just a whole day of talking about it. And Steve and I looked at each other and we said, this is like a first. How can we leverage this? It's not fair to send people back to their communities and have nothing to follow up with. And so we thought about starting the Jewish Leadership Institute on Disabilities and Inclusion. We found a funding partner in the Ruderman Family Foundation. We had our first institute in December in Baltimore. And it is teaching, training people, and it's giving them the opportunity to have 4.5 days of time to reflect on their role in their own community, to become an agent of change, to think about what the community could look like, to think about how to create a leadership challenge. Because we realize that in order for communities to be on board, and this is true in any size organization, there has to be leadership. And there has to be someone who can bring people together to create a common vision that can become that good intention that goes to action. So this is where some of those wonderful things come from. Now, we talked a little bit about belonging, right? People want to belong. So I'm going to share with you a story, true story. My stories are all true. And I'm not even changing the name on this one. When I first started my work, I went to visit this woman right here. Her name is Sharon Pillay, and she's a member of the Jewish community. Well, back then she was a Jewish woman living in Minneapolis. She has a disability. She has cerebral palsy. Not that that really matters, except for the fact that she uses a wheelchair, and she speaks slowly, and she's got a lot to say. But of course, she moved to the Twin Cities, to Minneapolis, St. Paul, 14 years before we met. She grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Yeah. Are you familiar with yeah. Okay. Grand Forks, North Dakota. Need we say any more? Sharon grew up in this lovely family. She has a brother, her mom and dad. They used to celebrate Shabbat every Friday night and the holidays and everything. But Sharon couldn't go to religious school because the building of the congregation had all these steps going up to the entrance and more steps on the inside. And somebody would have to schlep her up the stairs, and it wasn't always that easy to do, and nobody in the congregation, they didn't want to bother anybody. The family didn't want to bother anybody. Once in a while, Sharon would go to services, but not too often. So she's old enough to not be covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which means there was no protection under the law for her education. So mom and dad wanted her to be educated. What's important to her parents? An education. And Sharon went to school. She went to a boarding school. It was a Christian boarding school. And that's where she got her education. Sunday mornings, she talks about this a lot, but on Sunday mornings, she used to wait out in the hall outside the chapel till they were done praying. So she wasn't welcome in the Jewish community. Her parents didn't want her to go to the services at her school. So kind of confusing, but this was the best they had. So she goes back home finally, graduates from the academy, and she moves into an apartment on her own, lives by herself. That's, she's a pretty independent woman. And until she said, I want to be able to go to services. I'm Jewish. I want to be part of the Jewish community. So she looked around, and she said, I'm going to move to Minneapolis, because in Minneapolis, there's a lot more synagogues to try and join than in Grand Forks, where there's one. I think one. You are so familiar with it. I got to... You know Sharon, maybe? So she moves to Minneapolis. For 14 years, she attempts to join the synagogue. She attempts to go to the Jewish Community Center. For 14 years, she called. She got people on the phone saying, what did you say? I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Click to, we don't have people with disabilities here. Click to, please leave a message, and we'll never call you back. Click. No engagement whatsoever, and she was really frustrated until the inclusion program started 14 years later. So I went over to talk to her. I went over to meet her, just to chat. So I went to her apartment. She said, you're the first Jewish person to ever visit me. It's like, wow, how did you do that? How did that happen? Because she was really unknown. Remember? To be known, you have to be shown. So I said to her, well, Sharon, what do you want? What do you want? And she said, nobody's ever asked me what I wanted before. People just make assumptions about me and my life. She said, all I've ever wanted, you're going to get chills, I promise. All I've ever wanted was to belong. And I said, okay, let's do it. Where do you think you want to belong? And of course, Sharon being Sharon, she'd done, this is Google days, well, maybe not Google, but internet days. She said, I want to join Bet Shalom congregation. I want to go meet with the rabbi there. And this is my congregation, and I felt like, I'm not out here trolling for members because that would be, unprofessional. And I said, well, what is it about Bet Shalom that makes you want to go? And she said, well, because they're building a new building, and because there's a ramp to the bima, and because I can get in the building, number one. She said, I just want to meet with them. So we decided together that I would go with her to meet with the rabbi. So we go. Now, this was in an old building with a rickety sort of lift in the entrance. No accessible bathrooms, no accessible nothing in the old building. And Sharon and I went in to sit with the rabbi, and I was sort of there as an observer. And they had a conversation, and I have to say that this conversation was most likely like any conversation between a prospective congregant and a rabbi, which means it was very unique. It was very unique. And Rabbi said to her, Sharon, tell me about your parents. Do they live here? And she said, no, my parents have died. And then she added, I have never been to a synagogue to say Kaddish for my parents. Now, in Judaism, we remember by reciting the Kaddish, the prayer. It's a prayer that we say when we're remembering people. It magnifies and sanctifies God and our relationship with God. And it is customary to say that prayer on the anniversary of a parent's passing, in a congregation, in a group of at least 10 adult Jews. And she'd never done that. And I just stopped and I said, this is what this really means. This is what not being included really means. It means she can't honor her father and mother. She cannot fulfill that mitzvah. Who decided that she was less than any other Jewish person? Who decided that? So these are some of the things that I carry around with me as the stories that are out there. These are about real lives. This is not just some nice thing we do. So Sharon is she joined the congregation that day. She asked me to go with her to services on Friday night, so I did. We sat together in the back because it was the only place with a little indent. The lighting was terrible, and people would just kind of look at her. Her chair kind of stuck out in the aisle, and they kind of like, But she kept going. She kept going. Once the clergy were fabulous, the cantor, the education director, the few of us that knew her, we became her friends. But even in the Oneg Shabbat, the greeting time after services where you go for food, because, God forbid we wouldn't be where we are today without our food. Sharon she has a motorized wheelchair, and she'd be at the table getting food, and one time I was standing there talking with her, and the houseman, the staff person, came to tell her that her ride was there. She uses the public transportation that's provided for her. And so she went to leave. And he's bringing plates of food for her to take home. She's like all set. So she turns her chair around, and she says, "Excuse me," to the people standing in front of her, and nobody moved. And she said again, "Excuse me," and nobody moved. And it was like this until finally the people parted and let her through. She was still invisible. So it's not a one-time shot. This is a persistence that has to exist, and Sharon is one of those people who's very persistent, but we also have to be persistent with them. And we have to tell our congregations and let our congregations know that marginalization is not an option. Who we are as a people means that we are there with people, learning what is important to them and not for them. that they have a right to belong, just like any of us. And if you ask people to imagine what their lives would be like without their faith community, that's a pretty convincing thing. This is something to take back to your congregation. I commit to supporting people with disabilities and their loved ones in my organization. My first step is bring it to your inclusion committee, bring it to conversations with the board, with clergy, with the membership, with the committees, with your staff. Okay. I'm going to introduce you to Sharon. You get to meet Sharon, and you get to meet my son Jake. And there's some really other amazing people in a very, very short video that Sharon's congregation created for the first Jewish Disability Awareness Month. By that time, Sharon was chair of the Inclusion Committee. She also goes to Torah study every Thursday. She comes to services. She is part of that congregation. She goes to Shabbat dinner at friends' houses. And now we are working on, with her, not for her, with her, on a trip, joining us on a congregational trip to Israel. No special trip. No special trip for those people. Sharon gets to go to Israel with her congregation, where she belongs. So, I'm going to do this. We're going to put this, I changed the PowerPoint a lot since you got the handout, so it'll go up on the website. And come on. Slow thinking. When this is over, we'll have time for our questions, so if you want to stand up and stretch while we're waiting for our internet connection, feel free to. And here we go. Oh no, did I? Is the sound, uh-oh. It's always me.
Inclusion is one of the foundations of Judaism. In the Torah, in Genesis, it says we are created b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And that doesn't say only some people are created b'tselem Elohim. It says everyone is created b'tselem Elohim. We look to the text and we see that Moses was a person who had what we would consider to be a disability, and in his speech pattern. And God identified Moses as the person who had the skills and the ability to lead the people out of Egypt.
The whole, having the whole synagogue was really quite helpful. Being able to come in and be here at times, and is helpful to just have some place I knew I could go.
When David started going to religious school, it was amazing how many people would come and help and offer us encouragement and adaptations just to make it a positive experience.
When it was time for my bar mitzvah, then they made adjustments for stuff that I just couldn't do, like I chanted the Hebrew at the bar mitzvah instead of like singing it, and that really helped. They really understood me, what I could and couldn't do, and they believed in me when not even I did.
When Jonathan turned 13, he
Bet Shalom, come on, YouTube means house of peace. House of, yeah. Okay, we'll just, okay, we'll like this. Maybe it'll let us out then. Oh, escape, okay. Help, help. So, there are lots of stories, real people stories, observations. I'm not going to share those with you now. We all have our journeys. It is indeed, I don't know what to say. Sometimes it seems there are no words to describe what it's like to be with somebody when they're making that first foray into something that they so desperately want and that they love in their lives, that they want in their lives. And it can happen. It can happen organically, holistically, but it requires action, turning good intentions into action. So I want to be able to answer any questions or thoughts that you have, and yes. Microphone? Let's do that. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. I have a question about how you dealt with something. When, teens bond by going on trips, and in our church they go on choir trips and mission trips, and it's usually a certain price each year for the teen, and suddenly it was $150 more, and we had teens coming up to my child saying, I can't go this year because the Lyft bus made the trip too expensive. And so,
and they were making it our fault, right?
and it's all your fault. And so, that's where the rubber really meets the road.
Got it. Yeah.
And what that entails is a special budget for things like that, so that it doesn't come out of the choir director's budget or the youth leader's budget or whatever. So my question is, did you all deal with that, and how did you convince people, or did this not even come up as an experience for y'all?
Well, the biggest thing people love to say, we don't have inclusion because it's too expensive. So, knowing that's going to come up, doesn't all have to be expensive. In a case like this, where somebody cannot go unless there's an accommodation for them to go, it's going to come up at the beginning of the year, right? So there's lots of different ways. I would, in some ways, this is the opportunity to think really creatively. So I'm just going to, besides the obvious of having a line item in the budget for, making it possible for all kids to go to participate, not charging extra to those families, not ever charging extra to those families. I would talk to the class. I would talk to the whole class and say, hey, you guys, we got to solve this, because we're all going on this trip together. Let's do some brainstorming. Let's come up with something. Let's see how everybody can go. That is the most engaging way to deal with it, I think. I think it ought to be the top of the church to have to solve it. Remember how inclusion is woven into congregational life? So you say, look here, top of the church. These kids want to raise money. What are you going to kick in? We need a matching grant. We need some money. These children not going is not an option. As the ancient Israelites did, Miriam couldn't go. They didn't go until she could go. So I think putting it in that context, if you believe that everybody belongs, that's the message that everybody gets. And it's not one person's problem. It's a congregational obligation and responsibility and opportunity in so many ways. So it's the creative process that goes into it. We had a situation, kind of interesting situation. I think I want to share with you. One of the synagogues, the older synagogues in Minneapolis, wanted to put in a ramp. So the inclusion committee sat down with the rabbi, and they, got to put in a ramp, got to put in a ramp. They got bids, the whole bit. The rabbi said, "Oh, I think I know some people who, by the way, are older, who could benefit from the ramp. Let's talk to them." They talked to them. They had 2 donors. They're going to put in the ramp until donor number 2 says, "Wait a minute. I'm happy to pay for that ramp, but you got to find money now to put in the automatic door openers, because a ramp isn't good if people can't get in the building." So it became then a congregational need. And it took a while to find the money, but they found the money. So I think, certainly, again, talking to the board, talking to the budget and finance people, the executive director, getting them on board with why this has to be budgeted is a good step for the next budget year. If there's money in endowment funds or something like that, that's good for now. Get it in the budget, in the line item. Sure.
Not so much a question, but I wanted to add a little bit to what Shelly was saying. I think for all of us, our congregations buy something. They purchase things. And what we purchase reflects what's important to us. And I think sometimes framing the conversation with your congregation in those terms, sort of like the slide Shelly put up, if the intention is good, but it isn't followed by action, not only, there's something about the quote says that once you do the action, you've actually intensified the intention. So I think sometimes talking about, we buy stuff, we're going to buy a new floor, we're going to get a new chandelier, or whatever. What stuff is really important to us? I think sometimes moving that conversation up a notch can help. Because sometimes accommodations are expensive. Changing your heart you can do for free. And then the other thing is, the other piece that's important is really thinking through how you welcome the conversation about what somebody says they want. Because whether a person has a disability or not, what they want from their congregation may be something the congregation can respond to, and maybe it can't. But the way we find out is to engage in that conversation and come up with a compromise. And I think part of becoming accessible, part of becoming welcoming, is thinking through how are we going to have that conversation.
That's right.
So
you're right. It's about the relationship. It's not about the professionals having to fix things, which is, we all kind of come from that fixing mode.
And the other thing I want to throw in is the plug for networks, because I'm here on behalf of a local network, and some of us who are here also part of that network, is broaden. If you can't come up with a solution, broaden, pull in more people, whether it's from your congregation or other congregations or whatever. Pull in more people to help you think about this, and pull in more people with disabilities to help you think about this. So when Shelly talks about the creative process, that's what gets triggered in my mind. Have a network.
Yep, have a network. Make sure there are people with disabilities in everything you do.
Just when the experience with Sharon where she was invisible, it triggered for me, I wonder if parents, we set our children up to be that way, because when they become curious, when they see a person who's different, don't stare. And we're afraid for them to ask questions, because what if they were to go up to somebody in a wheelchair and say, "What's wrong with you?" I mean, we would be mortified. But, maybe there's ways we could embrace our child's curiosity in a positive way. And so I'm curious, how would it be received if a parent with a child came up and said, "My daughter is curious, is it okay if she asks questions?" Would that be intrusive, or would that be welcome?
Disability question. Start with, "Hey, what's your name?"
Yeah.
Don't say, "What's wrong with you?" and not ask to build a relationship with the person at all.
Exactly.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I remember being in a Michael's store, And a kid came up to Amy and said, "Why are you in that chair?" I mean, they were fingering it. It was purple, and there was nothing wrong with doing that at all. And the mom said, "Shh, don't ask that," you know. And so suddenly Amy feels like an untouchable because that mom did that, you know. And she has her pat line. Her pat line is, "I was born with weak muscles," which is a lot easier than saying I have cerebral palsy, you know.
They don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Okay, here, and then I'll be right back.
Yeah. Shelly, this is little different, but I would like to know as an outsider, as an Indian, I wanted to know a little more about the Jewish practice, because in the Old Testament we see the animals with some handicaps. They should not be given as offering.
Right.
Like that, the Jewish practice, I think mostly Asian also, they have regarded only the good as best and always neglect the disabled things, you know, animal or human. In my country, where I come from, majority Hindu religion, and the Hindu religions, they believe it is a curse. Being disabled is a curse. So it is the sin they have done in the previous birth. That is why this birth, they are born like that. So they neglect, and many millions of children are suffering. Right. So still the Hindu belief is they are there because of their sins. So you don't need to do anything.
Yeah, no, we don't go down that
so
road.
In that kind, the same Old Testament, Old Testament, we see that kind of references then and there. So I would like to know how the practice in Jewish synagogues and, in the modern days, that too in the 21st century in America, and how you are practicing. Just I would like to know, when I go back to my country, I take something.
Okay, that's a great question. I would say it depends. It depends. I travel in circles, I work in a lot of different Jewish communities, and I have relationships with different there's 4 major movements in Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. They all come at it in different ways in Judaism. But on one thing we can all agree, and that is people with disabilities belong in our community, in our individual communities. We may come about it different ways, but that's the inherent belief. And as far as, and you speak about the sacrifices, and there were, who can be of service in the temple, and so forth. I just, my own personal theology is I don't buy that in terms of exclusion. I look at that more in terms of roles and how things are done. But it can't be a barrier. There's a congregation that they have somebody turn the electricity on before the Sabbath, because they don't do that on the Sabbath. Yet they installed a lift, an electric lift, so that one girl, when she had her bat mitzvah and she used a wheelchair, could use the lift to ascend to the altar, to the bima, so she could chant from the Torah and so forth. And I met with it, this is a long time ago, and I met with this rabbi, and I said, so, tell me, how are people with disabilities, what are you most proud of? I always ask that question, what are you most proud of? And where do you think you could do things differently? And he said, well, we really want to have more people with disabilities participate in services. We want them to bless the Torah. We want them to, be up here. And he said, but the thing is, we have a lot of people who use walkers, and they usually sit in the back row, and we'll approach them and ask them if they want to come up and say the prayer, the blessing, and they really don't want to, because they don't want to be the only ones taking the lift, because they aren't able to take the stairs. So, putting my little creative thinking cap on, I said, well, why don't you have a Shabbat morning service where everybody ascends the bima the same way? And he said, no, we can't do that. We can't run the electricity. But you'll do it for this person, so they can be, and it was like, it struck me as something that's really must be discussed. It must be talked about. If this is a belief of the congregation that you don't run the electricity on the Sabbath, yet you're going to do that, you're going to make an exception because it will bring honor to someone who can't get up there another way. Examine that, and what does that really mean? And is that you know, I mean, and I can't answer that for anybody, any congregation at all. All I'm saying is talk about that. Talk about the practice. And think about it. And think about what it's saying. Think about the implications. And have the discussion. Was it Einstein? Well, can't remember if it was Einstein. Well, it doesn't matter who said it. But when you have a problem, 95% of the time you spend talking about the problem and teasing that out and sorting that, and 5% of the time figuring out the solution. And you know, we have to wrestle with things. Just like Jacob wrestled. We have to wrestle. And I know we're out of time.
Do you have time for one more question?
I do, and I see another question there too, so I don't know.
Shelly, I'm just curious, leading a worship service and ministry for people with special needs in the Christian tradition, I've run up against issues on recruiting volunteers. You're talking about a inclusion team or an inclusion committee or even an inclusion person, and my question is this. We know in faith communities, just like in any community, 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people.
Right.
And the 20% of the people that usually do it are the people who are vested and have skin in the game and are interested in whatever that ministry is. As you know, particularly because I work a lot with the severe and profoundly disabled, these families are exhausted.
Yes.
So how do you find, so I have lots of really good ideas from them, and I have no muscle. I have no people who can give or are willing or able, maybe is better said, to give the time. So what, have you run up against that in this? And what's your suggestion?
Well, number one, knock down the silos, because this is a congregational issue. It is not your ministry's issue. It belongs to everybody. And that being said, you know, getting that, you know, whose responsibility is it to not just find volunteers, but to, you know, confirmation classes, things like that. Do they, and, oh boy, this is gonna, I don't mean to tie myself into a knot, because people with disabilities are not somebody's mitzvah project. They're, you know, they're not the, oh yeah, good deed. But what I am saying is that it could certainly be a responsibility of different members of the congregation to, you know, to attend the service, or, and not just attend the service to babysit, but attend the service to be in the service with everyone else. It's not, you're not coming to be special, but we do need to support parents who need a break. You might say, you know, we're gonna sign you up. This might be, there are congregations where it is obligatory of their 10th graders, their 9th graders, to become those support people in the congregation for a number of needs, not just disability. Maybe kids with social difficulties that will benefit, or social anxiety that will benefit from like one person who's their person. So, yeah.
Shelly and I were talking on Sunday when I picked her up at the airport, and we had a great time. And
I had grits. It was so good. I love my grits.
But, one of the things I think that we both touched upon, which eventually could lead to all of us not having a job, which would be great.
Works for me.
Truly. Is that when we engage those in our congregations who don't live with and have no experience with an individual with disabilities, that's when we've won. And it's the challenge for all of us is being able to bring others on board so that they see the value, and it's not an us and them, and we're not just a line item anymore. And it requires so much more than
it requires so much talking and conversation and sharing but those of us who have disabilities or have raised disabilities or the good news is we're all used to working hard at everything because it's never easy. It's even harder. But I think ultimately when we all recognize it's not just tapping on the shoulders of those who, well, she has a nephew with special needs, so I bet she'll volunteer. It's reaching out to those, and as one of the verses said that you had on there, the obligation for all to be a part. But that was a conversation we had.
Exactly. I want, oh, Dave will take that. I want to, I've got a question too. I just want to, okay, well, I thought I'd show you this because it's actually over on the table. This is the display copy. This is the guide to inclusion in Jewish communities, but it also works very well in other faith communities. It is the how-to. It's the, how it came about is that my liaison committee, after about 3 or 4 years of meetings, said, you know, we're kind of being reactive here. Let's talk about how we can be proactive. So I said, okay, let's make this our problem together. And we spent 6 months figuring out what we could do. The end result was a roadmap, a guidebook. And this took about 3 years to write. We piloted it in Minneapolis, and it's been piloted in other communities around the country. And so I just wanted to, I can leave it up here if you want to look at it or share it. And we have special conference pricing. So just saying. Okay. Yes.
I don't know how important it is, but I just wanted to tie into a couple of things that were said. First of all, I have a daughter with special needs, and we welcome any question. I'd rather have a question than a judgment.
Yep.
And so a question is a question is a question, so you know, bring them on. As far as finding the volunteers, what we have been very successful with is going to peers and actually teaching them about how to interact with individuals with special needs. And there's several things that we've done in the community, including our inclusion experience, which is something you could bring into your congregation, and Julie has more information about that. But the more we let them see it, feel it, touch it, hear it, the more inclusive they are. We've just had a lot of good experience with peers, and that's kid peers, teen peers, and adult peers. And so the inclusion experience, which is available through JFS, is an amazing door opener to that. So Julie has information about that. So
thank you. Julie, is the information at the desk, or is it? Oh, good. Great. That's so great. So I just want to, I know we're running behind. I wanted to share a really quick story with you to just show you the kind of chutzpah sometimes you need to have when you believe in something so much. When I was hired by Jewish Family and Children's Service in 2001, the second day I was on the job, they said, okay, we're going to have a meeting. We have a meeting all set up with all the partners in the community who are in this program with the Federation and this one and that one, and all these people I'd never met before, even though I grew up in the community. So we go to this meeting. There must have been about 20 people there. And they said, can you introduce yourself? Sure. And I'm thinking, what do they want to know? I talked a little bit about my family, graduate school, raising a child with a disability, you know, my beliefs about fairness and justice and all of these other things. And I said, oh, yes, and I'm also someone who has a disability. Well, wouldn't you know, the next day, my new supervisor, it's my brand new job, right, calls me in her office and sits me down, and she says to me, you know, yesterday when you said that you had a disability, I thought that was really inappropriate. And I looked at her without thinking, this will tell you what my disability is, and I said, well, then it's a damn good thing you hired me for this job. So thank you all. Wishing you all the best. Thank you for being here.